So it's been about 1 year since I started working on my indie game, This Is the Game. So this is the project when I first started, and this is the project now. A pretty big difference. I think I started the game in around October of 2022 last year. At least this is the earliest footage that I can find in the earliest version of the files that I have. And this is the game you return to an old project that you abandoned and find that the game has evolved since you've left it. And I got this idea from doing exactly that to another project that I had been working on a couple months prior. In October, I basically had a very different vision for what I wanted the game to look like. I had this more bright color palettes with these little glitch effects kind of all around, and the world kind of looking more broken and things like that. This was mostly just because I didn't know how to draw art very well. I also had this kind of weird mechanic where the player started out as a cube and then maybe slowly evolved into being the little player sprite that you have now. But I didn't really know what kind of gameplay mechanics and stuff I wanted in the game going into it at this point, so I kind of just went with a lot of basic RPG elements that I was like, maybe I'll put this in there, maybe I won't, who knows. So things like combat, we got some dialogue too with the NPCs. A lot of the footage from October, November, December kind of all blurs together. I wanted the game world, this brighter game world, to actually transition into a darker, more muted color paletted world, which ended up being the theme that I went with for majority of the game now in a lot of the newer assets. But a lot of this was just working on sprites, adding in some new NPCs, and writing down a lot of my ideas and concepts on paper, honestly. I like keeping notebooks and stuff for development and writing down plot lines. I think it's just nice to have kind of a stream of consciousness where you can get all of your ideas on, because game development for me is not very linear. I often go into it knowing that I'm probably going to end up changing things around a lot, and that's perfectly okay. Sometimes mechanics, aesthetics, things just don't work out, and that's all part of the game development journey. In January is when I made the website for the game, which honestly still needs to be updated. It's really kind of outdated, as well as adding in some more sprites, some more NPCs, and starting to work on some of the more complicated systems like inventory, which I didn't really finish up until February. February is when I started streaming my game development on Twitch as well, and I basically kind of forced myself to do this because I wanted to get better at talking to people about the game and stuff like that, even though it was kind of terrifying, especially showing your code and stuff online. But I got a lot of really great feedback on the early prototypes of the game. In February, I really focused on adding in things like the inventory system, crafting. I even had farming at one point, which I may or may not put in the game. I'm not really sure, honestly, if it still fits. As well as things like the internal clock for the game, and then this is where I kind of had the idea of adding in a time almost loop or time crunch, I guess, where the game is going to run on around 24-minute time periods, with everything getting more and more corrupt and broken as it progresses. In March, I started working a little bit more on some new NPCs, as well as their houses and other places on the main map. I also had in things like player health and currency, which needs a serious refactoring. And then in April, some more NPCs, some more dialogue systems. And then this is when I started to work on the pathfinding algorithm. So I basically just wanted a custom way to control the NPCs getting from one place to another, because I wanted them to just be more complicated and smarter and actually tie into the game and make it feel like the NPCs were building upon the game world while you were gone, because having them on set schedules just was not good enough, even though I already had that mechanic incorporated in. So in April, I had the pathfinding algorithm set up and working with the tile map in Unity. And then in May, I started working on the GOP system, which basically allows the NPCs to make their own decisions based on actions and needs. I have an entire video about this system in depth if you want to hear a little bit more about it. But I basically started setting up the system in May and incorporating this in pathfinding, just trying to get it to all work generally. And then once that was finished around the end of May, I started incorporating more complex actions for the NPCs to do. So originally the only thing they could do was like chop down trees and get food from it, but slowly I gave them more and more kind of stuff they could do in the game, more ways to interact with the environment. So they could sit on benches, they could buy things, they could talk to one another and whatnot. And then in June was also when I made my first devlog and published that onto YouTube. In July, I started working a lot more on some assets, like the restaurants, and just adding in more and more code for the scope system. In August, I started laying out a lot of how I wanted the map to actually look like, as well as revamping the dialogue system. I ended up just using a package actually from the Unity Asset Store because it was just easier and faster to set up for what I needed. And then in September was when I started to make the trailer and Steam page for the game. This past month, I've been working on new gameplay mechanics that I want to incorporate. Essentially, I want a way for the player to go to alternate versions of the game and solve small puzzles and things that will fix glitches that are happening on the main map. So despite many bugs and refactors and just improvements that had to be made to the art, there's a lot of progress that I've made on the game in the past year. I'm excited to see what the game looks like in a year from now. Alright, bye.